I do think that there are still lingering questions that haven't been resolved on this. Epstein's brother, he still has concerns that this was not a suicide, that this was a murder. I think the video that we saw that came out that purported to show the outside of Epstein's cell, that didn't really add anything, because the door that we were looking at, that was not Epstein's cell. There has been no video that shows the actual hallway that he was on, and whether anybody could have been coming out of another cell in that hallway and gone into his cell. And so we still have those questions. Like I said, I'm glad that DOJ has done more work on this and continued to look into this. But I do have to say, from what has been released so far, I think that there are still lingering questions.
Hi, welcome to a brand new episode of the Michele Tafoya podcast. Please hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening: Spotify, Rumble, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to have you with us every single time. Download these podcasts, help keep us going, and it's free, so you got nothing to lose, and you've got everything to gain by our guests and the things that we do here. Today, Alana Goodman is our guest. You may know her from the Washington Free Beacon. She's a senior investigative reporter. She also wrote a book about Jeffrey Epstein's death. We're going to talk to her about the recent developments in the Epstein case. She's also covered crime in Washington, D.C. Are they manipulating the numbers? We're going to talk to her about that. And of course, we're going to get her thoughts on life in America post Charlie Kirk. All of that is coming up with Alana Goodman. Stay with us. Alana Goodman, thanks for joining us. I am so glad to talk to you. And I want to hit on a few things. You're fresh back from your honeymoon, but you've been keeping up with the news. You wrote a book about Epstein and about this convenient, death. Since Trump has come into office, these Epstein files have been just such a hot topic. And you've got Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, and his deputy, Dan Bongino, both of whom were very invested in getting the truth about Epstein out there into the public domain. And they have both come out and said with deep conviction that Epstein committed suicide. That's a little different from the angle that everyone was kind of expecting. What was your reaction to that?
Well, like you said, I know Dan Bongino did a lot of work on this before he joined the administration. I think he's very trustworthy on these issues. I'm really glad that the DOJ, the FBI looked into this. And I think what they said goes a long way for me, because I think that these are trustworthy sources. I do think that there are still lingering questions that haven't been resolved on this. Epstein's brother, he still has concerns that this was not a suicide, that this was a murder. I think the video that we saw that came out that purported to show the outside of Epstein's cell, that didn't really add anything, because the door that we were looking at, that was not Epstein's cell. There has been no video that shows the actual hallway that he was on, and whether anybody could have been coming out of another cell in that hallway and gone into his cell. And so we still have those questions. Like I said, I'm glad that DOJ has done more work on this and continued to look into this. But I do have to say, from what has been released so far, I think that there are still lingering questions.
And the DOJ has conducted interviews with Gislane Maxwell, moved her to a kind of cushier prison, Alana, and it's interesting. It feels to the people who were really hoping to get more answers, to get a list, to understand who went to Epstein Island, who might have, had sex with these young underage girls. They want these people outed. And it doesn't seem like much has come from this Gislane Maxwell interview. What do you expect her role in all this to be?
And that's very disappointing. Because Glenn was the one key who I think she knows so much. She was the one person who I think she could really shed a lot of light on what happened. I think that the real chance for that was cutting, if she was able to cut some sort of deal. Obviously, she hasn't been able to do that in a way that has made her open to talking. She still maintains her innocence on a lot of the charges, and so I just it's disappointing. I think that she knows a lot more than she's able to say, and I wish she would come out and say more on this.
It's interesting because one of them's dead, right? Epstein's dead. Right. She's really the other voice of this duo, and there's no one to counter or corroborate her if the other guy's dead. Unless we've heard from these victims now. We know that a number of victims went to Capitol Hill, spoke to some congressional leaders who were very moved by what they said. And it seems that these things don't really jive. If Ghislaine Maxwell is not, obviously she's serving time, but you've got all these different narratives, and it's really hard to understand where we find truth in this or how we get to that truth. And it doesn't seem to me that the mob is going to be satisfied until there are names. Do you think that's the case? Hey, I want to take a quick second to remind you about my good friends at besthotgrill.com. Fortunately, we have them in our corner, and that allows us to provide you interviews like today. So besthotgrill.com. They also make the best gas logs for your fireplace. If you're still burning wood or your old gas log is overdue for a makeover, Rasmussen Gas Logs has a new look for you. They have many finishes, including detailed bark, fresh and split, weathered driftwood, and white birch. For rooms with modern or contemporary design, don't use a rustic log set. Check out Rasmussen's popular fireballs to keep your fireplace's appearance in alignment with the room's decor. A fireplace is the focal point of every room, so you want a Rasmussen gas log set or fireball to look great when the fireplace is off, too, and even better when the flame is on. Get a free personalized log set sizing recommendation and more information about USA-made Rasmussen gas logs and Solaire infrared grills at besthotgrill.com. Besthotgrill.com. Give them a visit. American-made Rasmussen gas logs and Solaire infrared grills, USA-made, at besthotgrill.com. Besthotgrill.com. And it doesn't seem to me that the mob is going to be satisfied until there are names. Do you think that's the case?
I do. And, maybe we'll be able to get more information through what the Trump administration is doing with these investigations. But I really think a lot of this hinges on Ghislaine, and if she does decide to talk at some point. And I hope that she does. I hope that she's able to shed more light on this because, as you said, it's horrible for these victims. I mean, it's been so long. Justice has failed so many times repeatedly in this case and on so many levels. And, I really hope that one day she's able to share more on this.
What level of, I don't know if concern's the right word, but what level of thought have you given to, everything is put in front of this new DOJ and the FBI, and we're coming out with nothing really. And you wonder if there are people being protected, really big names being protected. How do you sort of measure that out? I think, like you said, Dan Bongino, I think has been really good on this, solid for many years. I do trust him. I think that, I would hope that's not the case, that people are being protected. Obviously, that has been the history, unfortunately, in this case. And,
and the fact that Epstein was able to get away with these crimes for so long because of his power and his influence. So, I think that remains to be seen, and I hope that's not the case, but we'll have to just see on that.
Yeah. Yes. The phrase of the year is we'll see what happens. Speaking of, crimes and other kinds of crimes, we got to look at Washington, D.C., and the National Guard was brought in by this administration, and it seemed to bring crime way down. There are clearly two sides to every story, sometimes 3 and 4. There are people who are saying, oh, they are, it's like militarizing DC, and we don't want these tanks in here and all the rest. The mayor of DC, Muriel Bowser, has sort of been wishy-washy on this. We don't like this happening, but oh my gosh, crime is down. Where do you see this going?
Well, I think that it has been a huge success in DC. When you look at the numbers, crime is down across the board. Carjackings, I think the statistic on that was 87% since Trump went in and put the National Guard in 30 days ago. So it has been a huge success, and I think, and I hope that he replicates this in other cities. Going back to even like the 1990s with Rudy Giuliani and what he did in New York with cracking down on crime, you heard similar criticism of him, that he was militarizing the city, that he was turning it into Disneyland. These are the types of criticism that I read about what happened to DC from the left. But that people who live there, they appreciate it. We all know that DC, anybody who lives in DC, I live outside of the city, but nearby, and crime has been terrible there since, COVID. It has just been awful. And I think a lot of the statistics that the DC government had put out saying that crime was down in the last year, those are not necessarily accurate, as anybody knows who has been in DC. So I hope that the Trump administration is able to replicate this in other cities. It looks like they are going to go into possibly Memphis now and do something similar. Trump has said that he wants to keep on DC, even though he has pulled out the National Guard for now. He said that he might go in and do a federal takeover again if the mayor of DC does not cooperate on immigration enforcement. And I think it's great. Just, establish law and order. It was much needed, and we're seeing the fruits of that now.
Well, it's such an interesting argument that, big cities are going to have their measure of crime. I don't see why that is necessarily has to be the case. There are places all over the globe, and some of them have what we would think is kind of a medieval way of handling crime. And I'm not suggesting we do that. But what I am suggesting is that we just because you're a big city doesn't mean you have to tolerate crime. Doesn't mean that crime is sort of part of the environment and the atmosphere. And, isn't this exciting? There's a crime going on over there. I mean, that's kind of what I hear from the other side, from the arguments against this, that a crime is just something you have to deal with in big cities. And as you said, it's amazing to me if someone says it's coming down, that doesn't mean the problem's solved. That doesn't mean it's so much better. It means maybe it ticked down for a period of time. That doesn't mean it won't tick back up. And that doesn't mean that it's a comfortable or safe place to live. I'm not quite sure why there's an argument against. I think it's because it's Trump, but you tell me.
Well, we've seen this for years too, with a lot of progressive organizations that were calling for defunding the police.
Yeah.
Trying to push very, very far left prosecutors who were just letting out violent criminals. This terrible attack on the train that we saw recently.
Charlotte.
Yeah, in Charlotte with the Ukrainian refugee. That was absolutely awful. But you have this in cities across the country, and a lot of it is because the last 5 years there has been this big push from the left for, letting violent criminals out, for not enforcing laws, and for defunding police. Yeah. And I think that this is a great thing that Trump is going in and he's saying, we're going to reestablish some law and order. And this is not, a fascist takeover or anything of what he's doing, as it's been framed by some of his critics. This is literally just enforcing the laws, as they are written. And so I hope that they continue to do this in other cities. It has been a great success in DC.
We can't let you go without talking about Charlie Kirk and the last question he was asked before he was murdered was about mass shootings, trans involvement, how many, and one of the things that he said right before that bullet tore through his neck was, do you include, I can't remember how he put it, and shame on me, but he was talking about like all the crime in Chicago that, you can talk about a mass shooting and you can talk about these weekends in Chicago where 5 and 6 people at a clip every weekend are killed, many more shot. And I don't know why that is not considered a product of gun violence. No one seems to point at that as the gun violence that maybe we ought to be looking at. And so, yeah, mass shootings are horrible. And they're usually committed by people who are not mentally with us. They're not mentally healthy. But these gang crimes in cities like Chicago in particular, because it is so bad in Chicago, why is that not pointed out more?
Yeah, and I think both share a lot of similarities. The gang shootings and also these attacks, these mass shootings with guns. It's coming from a decay in society. This feeling that there is a sense of lawlessness and violence, and it terrorizes people. I mean, what happened to Charlie Kirk? That horrible shooting. That terrorizes people too, because it terrorizes people against speaking and sharing what's on their mind, and discussing and debating politics. Whereas, the gang shootings, violent crime in cities, that terrorizes law-abiding people as well, who are just trying to go about their days. So these are two sides of the same coin, I think, in some way. And this attempt by the Trump administration to deal with law enforcement issues, to reestablish law and order in a lot of these cities, I think, that does have a connection to the shooting of Charlie Kirk, because you need to make people feel safe in society again, and that they're able to speak out, that they're able to just live their life and participate in democracy and day-to-day life. Yeah. So I think that is a big part of it too.
To me, the number one responsibility of any government, however small, however large, whether it's the federal government or your city police, is to keep people safe. It is public safety. Absolutely. So that you can go out and go shopping, go to work, go to school, go to your job, just walk your dog without feeling scared. Because 100%. When people start to feel scared, Alana, you know this, they don't go out. They don't enjoy their cities. And I've seen it here. I happen to live in the Minneapolis area, and it's been awful. And I just wonder at what point, or if at any point, do you think Democrats or the left are going to say, you know what, we agree. Things are too unsafe, and it is our responsibility to provide public safety. What do you think?
I hope that happens. I think we have seen that from some Democrats. Senator Fetterman, yes, in a recent interview, did say something similar, where he said, look, we need to crack down on crime. What Trump is doing should be embraced by Democrats. So, hopefully there will be more of that. That used to be a mainstream Democrat position. I think that has shifted in recent years, but hopefully it'll come back that direction.
And we're now in the wake of Governor Kathy Hochul endorsing Zohran Mamdani, who wants to empty Rikers, wants to, it's just this extreme left stance on almost everything. And it's astonishing to me to think that the governor of the state of New York that is not a Republican state by any means, but has its enclaves and is seeing, negative net migration, it is willing to endorse a man with these policies. What it suggests to me is she's ready to go along with those policies. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think she sees where the political wind is blowing. Mom Dami has been doing very well in New York. I think New Yorkers will see what happens. There were some very left-wing mayors back in New York in the 1970s and 1980s, and there was a massive surge in crime. And going back to Rudy Giuliani again, I mean, that ended with him with the broken window theory, with saying, look, we're going to crack down, we're going to make sure that people can live their lives, and we are not going to force people to, live in places with buildings that are burnt out and all kinds of problems. And so, I think it could come around to that again, but we'll see, how Mamdani does and how long he's in office.
It's really quite shocking. It is. It's really stunning. Alana Goodman, you can read her at the Washington Free Beacon. You've seen there, we've been showing you how to follow her on social, and congratulations on your recent marriage, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, she does good and is brave in her journalism. I end every podcast saying, be brave, do good. So like Alana, follow suit, and we'll see you next time. You can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.